Welcome to the Chirpy Heat Podcast, the podcast for housing providers navigating all things heat networks. I'm Christine from Chirpy Heat, and in each episode, I'll be joined by a guest who will share practical tips, guidance, and insights on heat network compliance, management, and technology, helping you run your heat networks efficiently and confidently. Hello, today we are joined by Chirpy Heat Director of Delivery, Josh Davis, and we're going to be diving into a topic which is front and centre for housing providers right now, and that is heat network compliance. And we are going to be specifically looking at how to get started and looking at what you need to be focusing on. And we're going to run through some examples and some practical steps and find out how Chirpy Heat can help with every step of the way. And this is very timely because the regulations come into effect next week on the 27th of January. So hi, Josh.
Hello.
Hi. First of all, could we have a look at what is changing in terms of the regulations then?
So the regulatory landscape for heat networks in the UK is shifting from partial obligations to a fully regulated market. Previously, heat networks had some requirements under the Heat Network Metering and Billing Regulations, which came into play in 2014, and that covered things like meter notification, what heat networks you had, assessments to deem whether it was cost effective to install meters, and to make sure that if meters were installed, that are operating and maintained in a correct manner. Now there's going to be a more comprehensive regulatory regime, and that's going to be done via Ofgem, who are appointed as the market regulator, and they're going to introduce a broader set of obligations really around consumer protection, making sure there's correct governance in place, data reporting, tariffs, performance standards, and then any other kind of ongoing compliance requirements and reporting. This aims to kind of bring the heat network sector in line with other traditional utilities such as the gas and electric market. So a lot of that stuff will be mirrored where possible, although it isn't kind of one size fits all with heat networks. So there are going to be some kind of rectifications that need to be made when that transition comes into play. And obviously the 27th of January that you mentioned is more around the consumer protection stuff, in line with the other two kind of core focuses for new regulation. There's going to be the Heat Network Technical Assurance Scheme, technical standards. There's a couple of there's one consultation out with multiple documents already out at the moment, but there's more to come. So the timing of this is just in between that sweet spot between knowing what's coming and still waiting for more information. And then kind of in the longer term vision, there's going to be heat network zoning, where there's local authorities managing heat networks with zone coordinators, and any kind of communal and district heat networks that are found within a catchment area will be mandated to connect to the wider urban district heat network.
Okay, thank you very much. Very nicely summarised. And what do you think then the key steps are people need to take on this journey around, getting compliant?
I think the key things is that we've been looking through all of the documents that are out specifically around the technical standards, and likewise with the consumer protection ones that came out recently. And there's a lot of information, there's a lot of documents, a lot of pages, and a lot of words. So I think it can feel quite overwhelming. So our kind of advice and our approach as well for our clients is to kind of take a step back and break it down and try and simplify it as much as possible to make sure there's a bit of a structured compliance journey rather than this kind of reactive firefighting and kind of compliance whack-a-mole. So we've kind of broken it down into key 4 areas. It's understand and plan is one of them. Looking at your portfolio and a data review. Identifying your policies and processes that you've got or that you need to implement, and then kind of tariff and pricing work as well. So I guess to lift the lid on them each a little bit, obviously the understand and plan sounds pretty obvious, but it's about assessing where you currently are against the current regulations, the upcoming regulations, so that you can build your compliance roadmap with clear responsibilities and timescales, and you can start to formulate that a little bit. In terms of the portfolio and the data review piece, this is about knowing your portfolio, which might sound obvious again, but a lot of people are still finding heat networks down the side of the couch. So it's understanding what heat networks you've got. Are they leasehold? Are they general rent? Are they sheltered and supported? Are they gas? Are they air source heat pump, ground source heat pump? So it's kind of working at these categories to identify what you're operating within your portfolio, and then kind of mapping out where those data sources come from, so that you can future report in line with any obligations, and you can ensure that the data that you've got is also accurate, which is the big one for the sector, because heat networks are data rich, but they're also quite poor in terms of the transparency of the data.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. And how is somebody going to be approaching these steps, like a housing provider, if they're looking at, these 4 steps and they think, where do I even start though? I mean, do you have to start at the beginning and work your way through, or how does it work?
It is a bit linear. There's a natural and productive sequence. So the first 2 that I kind of mentioned, then the kind of
you have to
understanding understanding and planning and the portfolio and the data review, like that aspect of it is definitely the first stage, because you need to know what you've got, where it is, what you need, and how that looks. But the kind of policies and processes and the tariff and pricing work, that's a little bit more interchangeable. So it's still linear in the fact that you've got to do one and do another, but you can do those ones kind of concurrently, because they can be distributed across multiple teams, or to multiple staff members that are working within a heat network team, if you're lucky enough to have one. Not many do. But the kind of planning and readiness assessment, that has to come first. You can't address gaps or prioritise work until you understand your starting point, really. And then in terms of your portfolio and data review, this informs what policies and reporting processes are required. So once you've done those elements, you can then move on to the policy and tariff work, as that does depend on knowing where the gaps are, and then you can kind of mobilise a little bit with the team. So it's linear, but they can, in policy and tariff work and service charges, they can be parallel as well.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. And I mean, there is a lot to get through. I can imagine it might be a bit daunting. Let's say there's a housing provider who's literally at day one. Have you got any tips for how to approach it if you're there?
Yeah, I think if I was putting myself in the shoes of managing heat networks in social housing, like I used to do, if I was going back to that route and I wasn't thinking about the external resource and I just wanted to do this myself and be like, okay, what am I going to do? I think the first thing I'd do is look at the regulatory authorization conditions for consumer protection. I'd get a highlighter. I'd go through that authorization conditions, highlighting all the things, because in theory, that is your playbook for meeting consumer protection regulations. It tells you exactly what you must do and how you comply, and it gives an indication of the metric and the frequency of the metric that you'll need to report on. So I'd kind of highlight every requirement and note where you have an existing capability already, and then where you don't, because that gives you the visibility over what needs to be done and then where the risks are. And then if you do have it in-house, great. And if not, you can kind of mobilise third parties or contractors to help. And then I think once you've done that initial review, that's when you can start to map your portfolio. So you've done the authorization conditions. You then look at, well, what have we got? Where are they? Who's managing them? Who are the key stakeholders involved in managing this heat network effectively? And then that allows you to map your timeline with your regulation, and it also allows you to highlight where the accountability is going to be, assigning those roles and responsibilities as well, whilst gathering that data along the way.
Okay, so it starts with a highlighter essentially.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and if you don't want to get the highlighter out and you want to save money on highlighters, obviously Chirpy Heat, a lot of this stuff we do support with anyway.
Yeah, well, obviously I was going to ask about that. So how can Chirpy Heat support on this journey to compliance?
Well, I mean, we position ourselves as the practical guide and delivery partner for heat network operators navigating compliant, especially in social housing. I mean, people who do know us know that we come from a social housing background. Myself, as I mentioned, our founders, consultants, client relationships, data engineers, they've all come from a social housing background in some capacity, either for or supporting in the past. But if we were to be involved and alleviate that pressure and save you your precious highlighters, and we were to support, we'd probably look at undertaking a regulation readiness review to assess and benchmark your organisation against where you are in the terms of rag rating, percentage rating against current compliance, what's coming in the pipeline, as you said, next week, but we'd go a bit further than that as well. We can look at the technical standards and what that looks like based on the information that's readily available, and then we'd help to create a compliance roadmap. So this is what you've got, this is what you need, this is what you need to do to get to full compliance, and by the dates that it needs to be done by, what the deliverables are, what the resources are that you require either internally or externally. And then we kind of support through all the elements of data, because data is the big one. that's the one that underpins all of regulation, because you'll have all of these processes, policies and procedures in place, but ultimately you need to have the metric that allows you to report to the regulator. So we can help with that kind of data specification and readiness as well, and help to get the KPIs together so you can report to the regulator, and so you can start to do that pre-HENTAS, the technical standards, do that pre-work to make sure that you've got your checklist ticked so you can springboard into regulation with a smile on your face.
Yeah, I love it. Springboarding into regulation with a smile on your face.
Yeah, hop, skip and a jump.
Amazing. Well, yeah, I think perhaps we should leave it on that note, the springboard and the smile. But yeah, unless there's anything else you want to cover, or, you know, reflections on the regulations yourself.
Yeah, I guess springboard's the right term, because I guess spring 2026 is when we're likely to have access to the Ofgem portal that allows us to designate a responsible person for an organisation and put all of our data in there. So I guess there's a lot that needs to be done between now and spring, because it's not going to be simple to just log on and then have everything readily available. I think the big thing that I'd say as a key takeaway is don't wait for things to happen. Now is the time to start readying yourself with that data foundation to prepare for the portal going live in spring, and then reporting all through the year, because it will need to be backdated to April 26. So you can't backdate something if you've not started it already. So that's the key takeaway, I'd say.
Okay, thanks, Josh. Well, that's been a lot of information there. I think that's been really, really useful. Hopefully the listeners have found it informative, useful takeaways, and also encouraging, because like you say, there's lots that can be done and there is time to get it done. So yeah, that's great. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, that's a wrap for today's episode of the Chirpy Heat Podcast. We hope it's given you clear, practical steps to support you in managing and operating better heat networks. Remember, all our show notes, guides, and resources are available at chirpyheat.com. For any further support, you can contact our customer team at client.relationships@chirpyheat.com. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.